Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne. Welcome to my channel. I grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia, without any help really from lots of things, but certainly not from greenhouses or grow lights or humidifiers, really just me and them, outside or inside, or we really don't get along at all. So if that sounds like your bag, plant lovers, do hit subscribe. I post every week. The ramblings of an amateur are what you're going to get, but it might help you figuring out how to grow orchids in your conditions. Which leads us, I guess, very cunningly to these glorious orchids right in front of me. And the reason I'm standing up, plant lovers, is that it is late autumn. We haven't switched into winter yet. But look, ta-da, ta-da, we have Cymbidiums in bloom. So this video is all about early flowering Cymbidiums. But now it's kind of relative, isn't it? What is early? We are still in autumn here in Australia. We haven't shifted to winter yet. And a lot of species Cymbidiums do actually flower at this time. So from mid-autumn through to winter. And then hybrid, now these are the cool climate ones I'm talking about. Now hybrid Cymbidiums can come into spike kind of from any time. It really depends on their ancestry and maybe what's going on climatically. For example, Exhibit A here, this is a hybrid Cymbidium, which is, as you can see, already in bloom. Others of my hybrids have got quite established spikes, and others haven't made their move yet, and they will make their move sort of more into winter and be flowering more in spring. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I do know that at this season, a lot of Australian growers are finding that their Cymbidiums are coming into spike very early, but some of them should. So let's have a look at this species Cymbidium that is an early flowerer, and it's quite famed for that, and it is Cymbidium tracyanum. Yes, named after a Mr. Tracy. So this one, we'll get to that. This one is a species Cymbidium that grows where most of the species Cymbidiums grow, in that sort of mountainous region in southern China, stretching across to the end of the Himalayan range, basically. So sort of northern Vietnam, northern Thailand, that kind of area. But tracyanum does also stretch down through that peninsula, further down into Thailand and Vietnam. And it can grow at high altitudes, but it also can grow a little lower. So it can actually take quite warm temperatures as well as the cooler temperatures that those mountain classic Cymbidiums take, and in fact need. But you know what, plant lovers? Cymbidium tracyanum is quite famous, and it is in a couple of books I've got. So let me just read you a couple of relevant snippets about this baby. Now, if you watch diligently, you might remember I found this fantastic book, which is Heat Tolerant Cymbidiums by quite a famous Thai grower, and I found it in a op shop, a thrift store. Amazing. And it was whatever it was, I don't know, $5 or something. It would have been a very expensive book, and it's incredibly useful. It has a lot of those cooler climate Cymbidiums are actually in here, because a lot of those have been crossed with warmer climate Cymbidiums to give you a hybrid, and depending on the exact hybrid can take different conditions, because the Holy Grail, not the Holy Grail, but people are often trying to hybridize Cymbidiums that can take much warmer conditions. So there's a bigger range available to people in sort of subtropical, tropical, warmer conditions. Anyway, a fantastic book. And Cymbidium tracyanum is described as growing on trees in moist, shaded, evergreen or mixed forests, and a popular species to grow because of its early bloom time, its fragrance, and its ease of cultivation. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. Actually, let me just show you that beautiful image there. Look at that, babbling brook and tracyanum. But look, what is most interesting is that ant. Now, someone did actually once leave me a message about their Cymbidiums, that there were ants crawling up the spike to the buds and to the flowers. Was that a problem? And I mean, I don't know scientifically, but all I can attest from my observation is that no, that the flowers secrete, the buds secrete a little dew, I suppose, a little sweet substance that the ants love. And I presume it's a kind of symbiotic relationship, because I presume then the ants will also deal with any other pests that the plant might have. And as a reward, the plant gives it this little sweet substance. So from my understanding, it's certainly not hurting the plant, but if anything, it's assisting the plant just get rid of nasty bugs that might be there, because the ants will get them. So don't be worried if you see the odd ant wandering up and down your Cymbidium spike. I did when I picked these out of the garden this morning to bring in. Now, another book for us to consult, Exotic Orchids. This Exotic Orchids in Australia by David L. Jones. I know this book has been reprinted and updated. This one is, though, from I think 1990. And there's just an interesting point about Cymbidium tracyanum. Once again, it says it's popular because of its early flowering, but also Cymbidium tracyanum can be readily distinguished by its prominently hairy labellum and strongly curved petals. So the labellum is the lip, this bit here, and you can actually see on this plant that the flowers are very, very hairy. Well, the labellum is, and on this one, this hybrid, it's not. But anyway, we digress. This is Cymbidium tracyanum. I bought it as a no ID, but from an orchid group sale. It had no tag on it, but everyone agreed. The flowers were still on it when I bought it, but really on their last legs. I bought it a year ago, and everyone there agreed it was tracyanum. So it's kind of got this browny green color, I think, but quite large flowers, quite stripy, and really quite striking, I think, as a flower. And tracyanum has been used as one of the species origins for a lot of hybrids, which is why I've got this one here. So a lot of hybrids that you see with that kind of stripe and maybe some of that colouring will certainly have tracyanum ancestry. And the reason I bought this one out, so this is another no ID hybrid that I bought from, I think, Facebook Marketplace, again, over a year ago. And it was in bloom, but it was in bloom when I bought it in August, and I'm filming this in May. So last year it certainly had a very different flowering period. But I think the thing is that you can see quite clearly that these flowers are related. So whatever hybrid this is, a lot of its ancestry will be Cymbidium tracyanum. So for some reason, the body clock of this hybrid has decided to go into action a little earlier this year. And I don't think that there's anything particularly unusual in the seasons that we've had in Melbourne. Summer wasn't crazy hot, but it wasn't crazy cold. It wasn't particularly wet or dry. Autumn, so far, because we're still in it, hasn't again been particularly cold early. It was quite warm the early part of autumn, so there was sort of a late warm surge, but not crazy. Anyway, I don't think the climate has been particularly unusual over the last kind of 6 months. So it's odd that Cymbidiums, for some reason, have just decided this is the time to bloom early. So the flower on tracyanum is very open, it's very spidery, and I love that shape in a Cymbidium. I don't tend to like the ones with quite round, dense flowers. I much prefer this more open shape. And everywhere you read about this flower, this species, it's the fragrance. Ah, it's a beautiful fragrance, they say. I'm here to tell you, plant lovers, I don't love it. It's a slightly acrid high note that's a bit sour. Yeah, you know, there are many more orchids that smell really beautiful. This, I'm here to tell you, isn't, but perhaps it's just mine. However, this one, this hybrid, this no ID, which I'm pretty sure has got a lot of ancestry of tracyanum, almost identical fragrance, slightly acidic, slightly acrid, slightly sour. Yeah, not great. And I've got the door closed, so the room is filling with this slightly sweaty shoe fragrance. Anyway, maybe that's just me. I will say though that I've got a highly attuned nose, so generally I'm quite attuned to scent, but this one, yeah, it's just not rocking my boat anyway. So I guess the thing about growing Cymbidiums is if you can grow the hybrids, you can grow a lot of the species because they're all cool climate ones and want the same conditions. A lot of the species are going to flower much earlier. So if you've got some hybrids, why not get one or two of the species, which will then give you a much earlier flowering time. And if you get a couple of different hybrids, they're all going to have a slightly different flowering schedule as well. So you should be able to get sometimes almost 4 or 5 months of flowering if you've got 3 or 4 plants, because the Cymbidium blooms do last a long time. Although tracyanum, unfortunately, doesn't last as long as Cymbidium flowers generally do. But if you've got the space, try and get 3 or 4 plants, and then you'll certainly get a really nice staggering of blooms, and they will overlap. So you'll have that ability to have a mass planting of Cymbidiums, which does look amazing. So just a bit of a recap then on basic care. As we read, this plant, they're all epiphytes, but they're often sort of at the base of trees, in the nooks of roots. So they are growing where matter has accumulated, so drop leaves, etc. And their roots are growing in that area, which is quite contained. So like many orchids, they do like to be, let me lift this one up, quite pot bound. So this is in a fairly largish pot. Now I did repot this when I bought it last year. And that can often sometimes send back a Cymbidium. They might sulk for a year if you do that. So bear that in mind. However, I also repotted this one and it certainly hasn't sulked. It has got 1, 2, 3, 4 spikes on it. So that's not a sulking plant. Now I've made many a repotting video, so I'll link my Cymbidium playlist, but essentially I just use an out-of-the-bag potting mix for Cymbidiums, an orchid mix. So it's sort of medium bark, but it's a bit more granular than just the bark. So it's almost got a bit more sort of compost in it, but it's still quite large bark, still very free draining. But I think for me, in my imagination, it replicates the conditions that these orchids are growing in, that sort of area where matter has collected over time and a plant's found the optimum space to grow. Free draining, easy to pot. Now I use terracotta because I'm just that kind of guy, but you can pot them in whatever works for you. These sort of cool climate Cymbidiums though do need a cooler climate, but there are, as this book attests, more and more Cymbidiums that can be grown in warmer climates. So if you are somewhere subtropical, tropical, or just a warm, temperate environment, you can certainly find Cymbidiums that will work for you. And this tracyanum, according to that book, can take quite warmer temperatures. But essentially they're all going to want dappled light. So they're all understory plants. As we read about tracyanum, it comes from forests that are both deciduous or evergreen. So certainly it might be getting more light in winter, but it will be weaker light and it will get more shade in summer. But generally under a tree, just imagine that, that's the kind of light they want. They are going to need the cool climate ones, the cool differential as we move into autumn. That generally triggers the spiking. It could also actually be about the length of the day too. A lot of plants sense the lengthening and shortening of the days, and that can trigger them to bloom as well. So who knows with tracyanum, whether it's the cold or the length of the day, but anyway, something triggers it, but they will need those cooler winter conditions unless you're growing the tropical ones and they're hybrid offspring, in which case they can take warmer temperatures. Now I have mine slightly undercover, so they don't really get rained on, but they can get rained on in a climate like mine in Melbourne. And tracyanum and most of those hybrids do want to be watered basically throughout the year. You can ease it off certainly in winter, but not an orchid that wants to dry out completely. So saying, I find they're as tough as nuts. And if you were to go on holiday for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks even, I perhaps wouldn't worry about them if it was winter. And food-wise, pretty much of a muchness for all of my orchids. I give it a topical application of a slow-release generic flowering plant fertilizer in spring. And then throughout the season, I give it a liquid fertilizer, which I've really dialed down to sort of 1/8, 1/10 of the recommended dose on the bottle. And that can be a liquid fertilizer that is aimed specifically at orchids or for flowering plants, or I sometimes use a tonic. So that can be a seaweed-based tonic or something that is from a worm farm. So worm farms produce a juice that's a runoff and you can dilute that and use it in the same manner. So those are sort of more tonics, but they're filled with wonderful trace elements, which the plants really love. So there we are, Cymbidium tracyanum. Yeah, not a great fragrance. The other thing too about Cymbidiums, obviously you'll see them in florists. They do last a long time as a cut flower, but they also last a long time, if not longer, on the plant. So if you can, why not just put the plant on your dining table? And I'm going to put this one because it's so handsome, so elegant. These are quite large-ish, so they have very large, well, they have quite elegant sprays of blooms and quite upright leaves. There are lots of hybrids that are more compact and more pendulous, so if space is an issue, you can certainly find smaller growing Cymbidiums and ones that have more pendulous flowers, so you can hang them up, which is a great solution if you're a bit space-strapped. And as I said, if you've got the wherewithal, if you've got the space and the resources to maybe get a few of them, you'll certainly be able to extend your flowering time if you include a couple of the species. And a few of the species, like Cymbidium erythrostolum, have beautiful flowers, really gorgeous flowers, and again, relatively long-lasting. So throw that into the mix, I would say. If you can grow the hybrid Cymbidiums, you'll certainly be able to grow the cool climate species ones. And then this one over here, probably not much to say really. It's a hybrid. It was a no ID, but when I saw the flower, it bears such a resemblance to this. Quite clearly, it's got a lot of tracyanum in its ancestry. As I said, it bloomed a lot later, earlier. It depends which way you look at it. It bloomed in mid to late winter for me last year, and this year it's blooming in late autumn. So it's certainly shifted. Now, Cymbidiums, these sorts of Cymbidiums flower from last year's matured pseudobulb. So the new pseudobulb will start to grow in spring and it will take the year to mature. Then the following cycle, it will send out a flower spike if it's happy. So this one, having bloomed early, I won't get flowers in spring because that pseudobulb's only going to flower once. Unless, of course, there's a new pseudobulb in there that hasn't bloomed yet, in which case it could perhaps be triggered to bloom in spring. Who knows? I feel though that with 3 spikes on this one, that's probably the number of bulbs I got last year. So I'm assuming it's not going to flower again. There's no hidden bulb in there. But again, I repotted that one after I bought it last year, and as I said, they can sulk, but this one certainly hasn't. It has grown like the clappers and produced, oh no, it has got 4 spikes for me, so there we are. So there we are, plant lovers, early flowering Cymbidiums. They're out there, be warned. But really, Cymbidium tracyanum, a lot of the cool climate species and anything that's been hybridized from them certainly could flower from now all the way through winter into early spring in the southern hemisphere, obviously. So give them a whirl. Certainly tracyanum, add it to your mix. I like the elegant shape of the spray. And this time last year, I was in Hobart at the Botanic Gardens, and they have a conservatory, and they just had a whole bench of Cymbidiums, and each one was a different color and form, but most of them were these sort of more spidery ones, and it just looked stunning. And I, of course, had bench display envy and thought, I need to get me some more spiky, spidery Cymbidiums. So I did go on a bit of a binge on Facebook Marketplace and get many that were of that kind of form, so that I can hopefully, when we move, have a little wonder wall of beautiful Cymbidiums all in bloom for quite an extended period of time. Well, plant lovers, there we go. I'm looking forward to the seasons moving on because many other Cymbidiums are in spike or just about to. So we might have a few more Cymbidium videos before the day is done. But anyway, wherever you are, I hope all is well. I look forward to seeing you next week. So hit subscribe. I post every Friday. Amateur ramblings, but wherever you are, I hope your orchids are doing well, and I hope if you're in the southern hemisphere, you've got some Cymbidiums in bloom. But I look forward to seeing you next week.